Have you ever been awake in those desolate hours before dawn, when the world feels like it's holding its breath, and the only sounds are the hum of your own thoughts and the distant growl of a city waking up? When the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows that dance just at the edge of your vision, and every rustle of leaves sounds like footsteps where there shouldn't be any. This is the kind of story that makes you check your locks twice before going to bed. So before the story truly begins, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you've had a similar creepy encounter, share it below. Maybe your story will inspire the next one. Now dim the lights, feel the air grow colder, and try to ignore the shadows dancing at the corner of your eye. Let's dive together into tonight's nightmare. I'd been driving a garbage truck for over 20 years. Not exactly a glamorous career, I know, but it was honest work and it paid the bills. My route started at 2 a.m., 5 nights a week. It was a whole different world out there in the dead of night. Streets deserted, houses dark. The only real company, the rhythmic grind of the hydraulic compactor and the low rumble of the diesel engine. Most people were sleeping soundly, oblivious to the dedicated ballet of the city's unsung heroes, cleaning up the mess while they dreamed. I knew every crack in the pavement, every overgrown bush, every dog that would bark even at the whisper of my truck rounding the corner. It was routine, predictable, and frankly, pretty peaceful. The quiet hum of the predawn hours became a kind of meditation for me. It allowed my mind to wander, to process the day that had just ended and anticipate the one about to begin. Every so often, a patrol car would roll by, or an early bird newspaper delivery driver would wave, but mostly, it was just me and the occasional scurrying critter in the shadows. My route was meticulously planned, optimized for efficiency. We had to hit every bin, every dumpster, sometimes within minutes of each other across several blocks to stay on schedule. It wasn't just about picking up trash. It was about the silent synchronicity of a city being serviced while it slept. Given the sheer size and weight of a fully loaded garbage truck can hit up to 60,000 pounds, you learn to be hyper-aware of your surroundings, especially in tight residential streets. Every mirror, every sensor, every light was crucial. Your visibility was limited, and the smallest miscalculation could lead to disaster. It was in this hyper-aware state, during those especially quiet stretches of my early morning route, that things started. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. The first time I chalked it up to fatigue. It was around 3:30 a.m., just past the old industrial park, a particularly dark stretch with few streetlights. As I slowed to maneuver the truck into an alleyway to pick up a row of commercial bins, I caught a flicker in my left side mirror. A shadow, but not just any shadow. It moved too fast, too deliberately, almost like a figure darting back between two buildings just as I was about to get a clear look. I blinked, adjusted the mirror. Nothing, just the oppressive darkness of the alley beyond my headlights. I shook my head. Must be the streetlights playing tricks on my eyes, or maybe a stray cat, big one given the speed. My sleep schedule wasn't exactly regular, and sometimes my brain would fill in blanks with whatever it pleased. I continued my work, the hydraulics hissing as the bins were lifted and emptied, and the incident faded from my mind. But then it happened again, a few nights later, on a different street. This time I was turning a corner onto Elmwood, a quiet residential lane lined with old oak trees. As the headlights swept across the sidewalk, I saw it again in my periphery. Not a flicker this time, but a distinct human-like shape, tall and gaunt, standing perfectly still under a distant street lamp for a split second. Then it was gone, dissolving into the deeper shadows of a large oak. My breath hitched. This was different. My heart gave a little jolt, not from fear, but from the sudden jolt of adrenaline. I stopped the truck, killed the engine, and peered out into the darkness. Nothing. The street was utterly still. No rustling leaves, no distant car, just the faint buzz of the street lamp overhead. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the gloom. Had I really seen something? Or was my subconscious finally giving in to the strange atmosphere of my work hours? I remember thinking how the silence could be so heavy sometimes, almost like a presence in itself. It was almost too quiet. I told myself it was just pareidolia, the mind making patterns out of random stimuli, the way you might see a face in a cloud or animal shapes in shadows. My job was inherently solitary, and maybe my brain was just looking for company, even if it was just a fleeting illusion. I restarted the truck, the roar of the engine breaking the unnerving silence, and continued on, but the unease lingered. It was like a tiny pebble in my shoe, not painful enough to stop, but just irritating enough to be a constant, subtle reminder that something was off. The next few weeks, these fleeting glimpses became more frequent, almost every other night, always in the periphery, always just at the edge of my vision, always just out of reach of a clear, direct look. It was like whatever it was knew exactly how much or how little to show itself. It was learning my patterns. Sometimes it was a shadow streaking across the back alleys, impossibly fast for a person. Other times, it was a sudden movement in a darkened doorway, gone the instant my eyes tried to focus. My initial dismissals gave way to a quiet, nagging suspicion. I started unconsciously checking my mirrors more often, my gaze flicking to the dark spaces between houses, to the dense foliage along the curbs. I found myself slowing down more than usual on certain stretches, almost hoping to catch it again, to prove to myself that it was nothing, but every time it would vanish. Every time I'd be left with that same unsettling sensation, that prickle on the back of my neck. I began to realize that the figure, whatever it was almost always behind me, or just off to the side, as if following. It never seemed to appear in front of the truck's path. One night I was stopped at a red light, the only vehicle for blocks. The intersection was well lit, an unusual relief on my route. I glanced in my rearview mirror, checking the empty street behind me, and there it was. Not a shadow this time, but a distinct, stick-thin figure, standing in the middle of the road, directly behind my truck. It was too far away to discern details, but its posture was unnervingly rigid, almost like a mannequin. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. My blood ran cold, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep breath, and opened them again. The figure was gone. Just the empty, deserted street stretched out under the orange glow of the streetlights. The light turned green. My foot was glued to the pedal for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. I drove through the intersection, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, but there was nothing, absolutely nothing. It was then, truly, that I knew I wasn't just tired anymore. That night, after the light turned green and I drove away from that empty intersection, a cold dread settled deep in my stomach. It wasn't just my imagination anymore. What I had seen was too clear, too deliberate in its stillness to be a trick of light or a figment of exhaustion. It had been standing there, watching my garbage truck, entirely alone on a deserted road. The implication that something was actively following me on my early morning route was profoundly unsettling. From that night on, my job changed completely. The quiet solitude I had once cherished became a source of intense paranoia. Every shadow elongated by my headlights seemed to shift and writhe. Every rustle of leaves was a potential footstep. I started checking my rearview mirror so often, my neck ached. My eyes darted from the side mirrors to the rear camera monitor, then back again, constantly scanning the darkness behind and beside me. It was like I was trapped in a perpetual game of hide-and-seek, except I was the only one playing, and whatever was searching for me already knew all my moves. The sightings became undeniably bolder. It was no longer just a darting shadow. Sometimes, as I'd reach a bin, I'd see it, a tall, emaciated figure, standing perfectly still at the very end of the street, perhaps half a block away, silhouetted against a distant streetlight. It never moved when I looked directly at it. It just stood there, a dark, motionless sentinel. But the moment I turned my head away, even for a second, to operate the hydraulic arm or check the next bin on my list, it would be gone. Vanished. It was playing with me, I realized, testing me, There was one particular old Victorian house on my route, set back from the street with a long, winding driveway. Its trash bins were always right at the curb. One night as I pulled up, I glanced towards the house. The windows were dark, but in the faint glow of my truck's lights I saw it. The figure was standing right on the porch, leaning against a support pillar, its head tilted slightly, as if observing me. My stomach dropped. I froze, my hand hovering over the controls. It was closer than it had ever been. A sudden gust of wind rattled the leaves on the ancient oak in the front yard, making them dance like skeletal fingers. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I stared, willing it to disappear, but it remained, just standing there, a silent, unnerving presence. I found myself holding my breath. Then, just as I was about to shout, to do something, anything, my phone, which I kept mounted on the dash for navigation, buzzed with an incoming text from my dispatcher, a routine check-in. The sudden vibration startled me, and my eyes flickered down for a fraction of a second. When I looked back up at the porch, it was gone. Of course, it was gone. My heart was pounding like a drum against my ribs. I picked up those bins faster than I ever had, my hands clammy, my gaze still flicking nervously back to that dark porch. I didn't breathe easy until I was 3 blocks away, the roar of my engine a comforting, albeit temporary, shield against the profound silence of the night. I tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe it was a homeless person, wandering the streets in the early hours, but no homeless person I'd ever seen was so unnaturally thin, so perfectly still, and so adept at vanishing into thin air. Besides, a fully loaded garbage truck is not exactly quiet. We're talking about an immense machine, its tires alone taller than most men, its engine a constant, low growl, and the compactor, when it engages, makes a powerful grinding and crushing sound that echoes for blocks. Anyone trying to stay hidden from it would be hard-pressed. Yet this thing, whatever it was, moved with such eerie silence, such impossible speed. I started losing sleep. Even during the day, I'd wake up from restless naps, convinced I could still hear the distant rumble of my truck's engine, or the subtle hiss of air brakes. My wife noticed my agitation, the dark circles under my eyes. She asked what was wrong, but how do you explain something that sounds insane? Honey, there's a phantom figure following my garbage truck on its early morning route, and I think it's watching me. She'd probably think I was finally cracking under the pressure of the job, or worse, that I needed psychological help. So I just mumbled about stress and the demands of the job, trying to brush it off, even though I felt a knot of dread tighten in my chest every time I thought about the next shift. One particularly foggy night, the kind where the streetlights glowed like halos in the dense mist, reducing visibility to a mere few yards, I was meticulously navigating a particularly narrow street. It was around 4 a.m., the air thick and damp. I was moving slowly, relying heavily on my mirrors and the faint reflections of my lights off the mist. As I approached a row of 4 bins, I caught a glimpse in my right side mirror. It was standing directly on the opposite sidewalk, barely visible through the fog, its outline blurred but unmistakably there. It was taller, thinner than I remembered, almost stretched. And for the first time, I felt something new, something that wasn't just fear but a profound, chilling curiosity. It was almost as if it wanted me to see it. I stopped the truck, killed the engine, and leaned forward, straining my eyes, trying to pierce the ghostly veil of the fog. The silence was absolute, save for the faint drip of condensation from the overhead power lines. I couldn't make out any features, just that elongated, dark silhouette standing motionless on the sidewalk. It wasn't menacing in its posture, just observing, but the sheer unnaturalness of its presence, its ability to manifest and vanish, was what truly terrified me. My mind raced, trying to conjure any logical explanation. A hallucination. A trick of the light and the particularly dense fog. My brain was working overtime, trying to find a normal explanation for an increasingly abnormal situation. I considered getting out, walking around the truck, trying to get a better look, but something deep inside screamed at me not to. The idea of being outside the safe confines of my cabin, exposed to whatever that thing was, filled me with an immediate, paralyzing terror. I sat there for a full minute, perhaps longer, just staring. The figure didn't move. It was a silent, terrifying standoff. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, I put the truck in gear and pulled away, my eyes still fixed on that spot in the mirror. As the truck moved forward, the figure remained, fading gradually into the swirling fog until it was absorbed completely by the whiteness. I drove the rest of that night in a state of heightened alert, my heart pounding, my mind racing. It wasn't just following me anymore. It was waiting for me, and it was getting closer. I knew with a chilling certainty that the next encounter wouldn't be fleeting. The fog incident was a turning point. It wasn't just observing me from a distance anymore. It was an active participant in my routine, weaving in and out of the environment, appearing right where my gaze was likely to fall. The chilling thought that it wanted me to see it, that it was deliberately revealing itself, gnawed at me. My sleep became almost non-existent. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, picturing that gaunt silhouette in the mist, hearing the phantom hum of my garbage truck even in the quiet of my bedroom. The terror wasn't just about what it was, but what it wanted. Was it malicious, curious, or simply hungry? I started making deliberate small changes to my early morning route. Instead of taking the usual right on Maple, I'd take a left. I'd skip a block, knowing I'd have to double back later just to see if it would still appear. And it always did. Within minutes, often from a completely different direction than I would have expected, it would be there again, a fleeting presence in my mirror, a phantom flicker in the periphery. It was like no matter where I went, it knew. It was always there, waiting just beyond the threshold of my immediate perception. This confirmed a terrifying thought. It wasn't just following my specific truck, it was following me. The psychological toll was immense. My hands were often shaky as I maneuvered the massive vehicle. I found myself talking to myself, muttering under my breath, "Just go away. Leave me alone." One night I was on a long, straight stretch of road, the kind where you can see for almost a mile in either direction, nothing but streetlights blurring into the distance. I glanced in my rearview mirror. Nothing. I looked for a full 5 seconds, then looked ahead, then back again. Still nothing. Just the empty road. A sliver of hope, a tiny, desperate thought started to form. Maybe it had finally given up. Maybe it had found another target. Maybe I was finally free. Then, as I rounded a gentle bend, there it was, standing perfectly still at the very edge of the road, half hidden by a cluster of overgrown bushes. It was like it had materialized out of the asphalt itself. My heart jumped into my throat. It was not giving up. It was on a Tuesday, about 2 weeks after the fog incident, that I reached my breaking point. I was emptying bins in a deserted industrial park, a labyrinth of concrete buildings and dark alleyways. The stillness here was absolute, punctuated only by the distant rhythmic clang of metal from a processing plant miles away. As I backed the truck towards a row of large dumpsters, I saw it again in my rear camera, a tall, impossibly thin figure standing at the mouth of the alley, maybe 50 yards behind me. My hands clenched the steering wheel. This time I didn't look away, I just watched it on the monitor. It was too far to make out details, but its shape was unmistakable. And then it started to move, slowly at first, just shuffling forward. My stomach knotted. It was coming closer, deliberately. This wasn't a fleeting glimpse, this was an approach, a slow, relentless advance. I started to sweat, even though the air was cold. My mind raced. Should I drive away? Should I try to outrun it? But a strange, desperate compulsion took over. After weeks of being haunted, of feeling like prey, a part of me needed to know. I needed to see it, truly see it up close, to understand what I was dealing with. So I did something incredibly stupid. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the faint, cold whisper of the wind. I kept my eyes glued to the rear camera monitor. The figure continued its slow, deliberate walk down the alley. It appeared to have long, gangly limbs, disproportionate to its slender body. Its head seemed small, almost shrunken. It wasn't walking with a normal human gait. It was more like a glide, a fluid, unnatural movement. As it got closer, the pixels on the monitor helped to resolve its form, but never its features. It was simply a dark, featureless silhouette, even in the camera's night vision. It stopped about 15 yards behind the truck, directly in the middle of the alley. It stood there perfectly still, just like all the other times. But this time it was close enough that I could almost feel its presence. My breath hitched. I could almost hear the blood rushing in my ears. I wanted to turn around, to look directly out the back window, but I was paralyzed, glued to that fuzzy image on the screen. It was then that I noticed something truly horrifying. The way it stood, the way its limbs were angled, it looked like it was staring directly into the camera lens, directly at me. It knew I was watching it. I couldn't take it anymore. A primal scream wanted to rip from my throat, but it was caught somewhere in my chest. I jerked my head away from the monitor, towards the side mirror, then to the rear window, desperate to see it with my own eyes. As I turned, my eyes locked onto the actual alleyway behind me, illuminated faintly by the industrial park's distant security lights. It was gone. My heart plummeted. My hands flew to the shifter, slamming the truck into drive. I stomped on the accelerator, the engine roaring to life with a jolt that threw me back against the seat. I wasn't just pulling away from the alley. I was fleeing. I drove faster than I ever had, the massive truck rattling and shaking, barely taking the turns, my eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirror. I sped through the rest of my route in a blur of adrenaline and raw terror, not stopping for a single bin, ignoring the dispatcher's increasingly frantic calls on the radio. All I wanted was to get home, to the safety of my own four walls, to the light of day. I made it home as the first slivers of dawn painted the sky a bruised purple. I stumbled through the door, locked it, then locked it again. My wife found me slumped against the kitchen counter, trembling, still in my work clothes, the smell of diesel and municipal waste clinging to me. I finally broke down, everything spilling out in a torrent of choked sobs and fragmented sentences about shadows, alleys, and a silent, watching figure. She held me, confused but comforting, and for the first time in weeks I felt a tiny spark of relief that someone else knew, but knowing didn't make it disappear. I never went back to that job. I couldn't. Every rumbling truck I hear on the highway, every dark alley I pass, every time I glimpse a shadow in my periphery, I feel that cold dread seep back into my bones. The figure, whatever it was, taught me that some things exist just outside what we understand, operating by rules we can't comprehend. I still wonder what it was, what it wanted, and why it chose me. Was it a specific truck or the route itself that attracted it? Or was it something about me? I have no answers, only a lingering, unsettling question that echoes in the quiet hours of the night, whenever the distant growl of a passing garbage truck breaks the silence. It's been years now since I last drove that garbage truck, years since I saw that thing in the alley, but the memory isn't fading. It's an itch under my skin, a constant whisper at the back of my mind. Even now, when the house is quiet and the world outside is cloaked in the deep, comforting blanket of night, I find myself holding my breath, listening. Is that the wind outside, rustling the leaves, or something else shifting in the darkness? Is that the distant hum of a vehicle, or the low, rhythmic grind of something much larger, something approaching? The silence of the predawn hours, once a solace, is now a gaping void filled with apprehension. I check the locks on my doors and windows, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times, before I finally surrender to a fitful sleep. I find myself avoiding certain parts of town, especially those industrial areas with their dark, narrow alleys and rows of imposing dumpsters. The world just feels thinner, somehow, knowing that beings capable of such impossible disappearances and silent observation exist alongside us, just out of our conventional sight. Sometimes, when I wake in the absolute stillness of 3 a.m., my mind conjures that same gaunt silhouette standing in my bedroom, just at the edge of my vision. I snap my eyes open, my heart pounding, but there's never anything there. Just the familiar shapes of my furniture, bathed in the faint glow of moonlight. But the feeling persists, a chilling certainty that I was seen, that I am remembered. It's a fear that doesn't scream. It just settles heavy and cold, reminding me that some things once seen can never truly be unseen. And perhaps they never truly let you go.